A few years ago, I went on this 3.5-hour drive to Fresno. It's where I got my first job. I couldn't get a job here in the Bay Area because, well, I didn't have any experience. And I was told by my classmates, my family, my friends, that I could be able to come back home here to the Bay Area after I get 1 year of experience. And I believed it. It made sense. It was no big deal, right? A year, you can come back here to the Bay. Now, if you've never been to Fresno before, Fresno's like a totally different world. And nothing against people who live in Fresno or people who like Fresno. It's not just for me at this time in my life. So I felt like I was in a different state. I didn't feel like I was in California anymore. The way of living and everything is just so different. But I knew that it was temporary. I wanted to work here in the Bay Area because this is where my friends and my family are. This is where my loved ones are. So when I started living in Fresno, I knew that I had it all figured out. I knew how I would get back home. I had a plan, right? And so one of the things that I would do is I would go to Starbucks every week, okay, maybe every other week. And I swear that Starbucks has like half my salary because I would go there so frequently. And what I would do there at Starbucks is I would apply to different hospitals here in the Bay. I would apply to San Francisco General, to UCSF, to Seton, Kaiser, Mills Peninsula, Stanford. I'm sure there's other hospitals that I applied to. I consistently also worked on my resume. I wanted to make sure that it was concise, that it looked good, and I practiced my interview skills. At any moment that they could call me, I'd be ready, right? And then on top of all that preparation, I prayed. And I prayed consistently. So, after all that, 3 years later, finally, 3 years later, I'm still stuck in Fresno. And I thought to myself, what did I do to deserve to be banished to this city? I started to become frustrated. I started to become annoyed and angry, and I was like, what's going on here? I felt like I was stuck. Maybe there are some of you here who, like me, felt like your life wasn't going anywhere. You felt like days started to blend in together, or months started to blend in together. Or maybe there's an aspect of your life where you feel like you're stuck. Maybe you feel like you're stuck in a bad relationship, a toxic relationship. Or you feel like you're no longer growing in your job. Or you feel like you're paralyzed by the pressure of trying to figure out what major to take in college. Or maybe you're dealing with anxiety of an overdue bill that to an extent you can't sleep at night. Or maybe you're dealing with a chronic illness that's just so difficult to cope with. You feel like you're stuck. Or worse, you feel like you're going backwards. You feel like you're going backwards and everybody else seems like they're living the life that you're supposed to live. Someone else is enjoying that city that you've always wanted to visit. Someone else is advancing their career. Or someone else has bought that home that you've been looking at for a while. Someone else is having that wedding that you've dreamt of. You know, when you go to a gathering with friends that you haven't seen in a while, or with family who haven't seen in a while, they come up to you and they're like, oh, what have you been up to? When are you getting married? Do you have a spouse? And I'm like, not right now. But I'm working on myself. When it feels like so many people are moving forward, it can feel like you're going backwards. So when we start to feel this way, the question then becomes, what do we do? What do we do when it feels like we can't see a solution to our circumstances, a circumstance where we feel stuck? How do we move forward when we feel like there's no way out? And, I've tried to handle this before, and you've probably done the same. Like I explained earlier when the situation while I was in Fresno, I thought I had it all figured out. I had a plan, right? And I would try so hard to make things work. But it felt like I got stuck even deeper and deeper into the problems that I were facing. And it's just like quicksand in many ways. Have you ever fallen into quicksand? If you have, I'd love to talk to you after this because, well, maybe you can give me some tips just in case I fall into quicksand. But, well, if you've never fallen into quicksand before, when you fall in, you start to feel like you're slowly sinking in. And it's a terrible feeling, right? So you try to fight out. And you push with every ounce of energy that you have. And you reach to get out. But what happens? You fall deeper and deeper into the sand. You become more stuck than when you first started. And so when it's easy to lose hope when you're in a situation in a quicksand of life. And when your actions feel like they take you nowhere, when nothing seems to be going as planned and you just feel plain hopeless. So what I want us to take a look at today is what happened to a man who also felt stuck. He's a man from Scripture. He's a man who couldn't move forward. He couldn't get out of the situation he was in, so he felt like he had no hope. And what we're going to do is we're going to look into a book of the Bible called John. And we're going to be in John chapter 5, verse 5, and this is what it says. In verse 5 it says, "One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years." So this is our main character, and we don't know his name, but what we do know is that he has been paralyzed for 38 years. Now, I'm going to say something that might piss some of you off, but let me finish before you jump to conclusions. 38 years is already considered a majority of someone's life back in those days, prior to modern medicine. You were lucky to live 38 years back in those days, especially if you had a chronic illness. See, I'm not trying to judge any people's age here. Although, I am glad that I'm in my late teens, so I have my 20s and my 30s ahead of me, and I can't wait to see what they have in store. Anyway, so here's our guy. And he's been paralyzed for 38 years, and apparently he's not alone. So, who was with him? In order for us to find out who was with him, we actually have to go backwards to verse 3. And we see that he's part of, as it says in verse 3, crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. So this man was not alone, right? He was not the only one who was having problems. There were crowds of sick people there. And in this verse it says, blind, lame, or paralyzed. They're mentioned. Why? Because they are people who can't help themselves. The blind can't see. The lame can't move well. The paralyzed can't move at all. And they're all laying on porches. And we're not talking about a porch like we imagine porches here, which when I think about porches, it's in a house, the area in front of a house where you sit back and your dog's next to you and you're sipping on some iced tea or something else. So what does this all mean? What porches are they talking about? Well, in order for us to understand, we have to actually go backwards one more time into verse 2. And verse 2 says, "Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethesda, with 5 covered porches." So there's not just one porch, there's 5 porches. And these porches are huge. And they're all around this area, or this pool called Pool of Bethesda. So we have an idea of what this pool looks like. We're going to take a picture, look at a picture here. And this is a model from the Jerusalem Museum. As you can see here, the pool is divided into 2 parts. And when we zoom in and we take a look at the pool, the 2 pools, we can see this is where the 5 porches are. But the 2 sides that are facing us, you can see the walls are filled, right? But the 4 other sides and that center column are all open. They're all open to the 5 porches. And this is where all these sick people are. This is where our man is. And listen, the Pool of Bethesda was a big deal for this crowd of sick people because these people believed that this was a healing pool. Let me explain. So they believed that if the pool started to bubble up like a hot spring, it was because an angel came down and started to stir the pool. And when they started to stir the pool, they believed that if they could just be the first to get into the pool, they would be healed. Then they would be free from their sickness and be able to live a normal life without any disability. So, as you can imagine, there's a crowd of people here. Why there is a crowd of people here? They're just waiting for the right moment to get into this pool. But every single people knew that their only hope was to be the first in this pool, but it was downright impossible for them to get into the pool, for them to get healed. Because the blind, they couldn't see how to get there. The lame couldn't get there in time, and the paralyzed couldn't get there at all. And no matter what they tried, or no matter how hard they tried, they felt stuck. And it's not like there was a line to this pool, right? There's a crowd of people, but there's not a line to this pool. The other day, I went to the passport agency in San Francisco to renew my passport, obviously. So I had all my documents, because you have to have all your documents ready. You have to make sure that the appropriate boxes are filled and you sign in the right places, right? And you have to bring all of your documents with you. And then when you're there, there's this line down the middle of this room. And on both sides are a bunch of people who are waiting to go to the next window. So you're in this line, you start off in this line, and you get to the window, right? And the window, you just present all of your documents. And if you're missing a document, or you get something wrong, or you didn't fill it out properly, well, then you're screwed. You have to go back, or you have to leave, and you lose your spot in line. But if you get through this, then you're able to wait with the other group of people, wait to get to another window, where they will check and see if you can pay, and if you can't pay, then, well, you're also screwed. But the people there, they didn't have a number, right? There was no, now serving A134 at window 15. There was none of that, right? There was no line. So their situation, it felt like it was hopeless. And this guy just felt like as hopeless as everyone else. But while all of this is going on, what our guy didn't know, and what you and I often don't know, is that when we are in a hopeless situation, when we are in a situation where it feels like we're not moving at all, Jesus is moving. Look at how the story actually begins. In verse 1 it says, "Afterward, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days." So we have a picture here of people traveling from Samaria to Jerusalem. And in the background, you can see that's where Jerusalem is. So this is probably what it looked like when Jesus was returning to Jerusalem. Where it says the Jewish holy days, one of the Jewish holy days, we're not exactly sure which holy day it is. But the main thing to note is that during any of the Jewish holy days, there are crowds and crowds of people who are entering the city to celebrate. So not only do we have a crowd of sick people, we have a crowd of people who want to celebrate. So this was no ordinary day, right? Even more people were around this pool at this time of the day because it's the holy day. So it's like, imagine if you're at a concert. There's a lot of people around you, they're celebrating, they're singing, they're dancing. But while you're singing and dancing and celebrating, there's all these sick people around you. That's kind of what it was like. We have a picture here of a modern day time where people are at the Jewish holy day. So you can see how hectic and chaotic it would be. I mean, there's no space to go around. So we continue in verse 6, and this is when it says, "When Jesus saw him, and he knew that he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, 'Would you like to get well?'" So through this large and busy crowd of people, Jesus saw this paralyzed man. And let's be real here. Has there ever been a time in your life where you felt like, and maybe it's now, you feel like Jesus doesn't see you? We pray, and it feels like it just hits the wall. So we ask, Jesus, do you even see me? And it feels like when we're struggling, it feels like Jesus understands the struggle that we're going through. You ask, Jesus, do you even know me? And since he doesn't understand the struggle that we're going through, we tend to ask, or we might ask, Jesus, do you even care? But look, through this crowd of busy people, Jesus did see the man. And it's the same for you and me. Because he does see you. He sees what you're struggling with. Because he says he knew he had been ill for a long time. I mean, this is the first time Jesus is meeting this man. And it says he knew he had been ill. Jesus does know what you're going through. He knows that you've been frustrated and angry and afraid and anxious. And then Jesus asks, would you like to get well? He knows that you've been looking for some kind of break, some glimpse of hope in the middle of all the pain that you're going through. Jesus does care about you. We continue in verse 7 and it says, I can't, sir, the sick man said, for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone always gets there ahead of me. So this man, this paralyzed man, he's been doing this for 38 years. He knows his situation, but he keeps trying to do the same thing over and over again, expecting something different. I mean, isn't this the definition of insanity? Someone else always gets there before me, is what the man says. And so this shows that the man believes that there is only one way, there's only one hope, or there's only hope for someone else. Because someone else is successful, right? Someone else is wealthy. Someone else has good influence. But he feels hopeless. And when we see in our lives, where we see that in our lives and feel that in our lives, it's hard not to feel the same way. And where it says, I have no one to put me in the pool when the waters bubble up. The man only sees one solution to his problem. And we tend to do the same thing. We have an argument with a spouse or a friend, and we think that there's only one solution. Like we think to ourselves, man, I can't figure out a way to make her get over this problem. I have to be careful what I say. Instead, we should be asking ourselves, I need to find a way to become that person, to be that person that he or she needs me to be so that we can get through this problem together. And in the man's initial response, I can't, sir, he says, right? But here's the thing. The man thought that it was up to him. He thought that he had to be able to solve all of his problems, to be successful, to have the perfect family, and to have everything in order. But what he didn't know was that he just took the first step to being healed. He realized that he can't. He realized that he can't do it himself. And that it wasn't up to him. Jesus says, you think that it's up to you, but it doesn't have to be. Jesus says, let me take those burdens off your shoulders. Let me put those burdens on my shoulders. And in verse 8 it says, Jesus told him to stand up, pick up your mat and walk. This man believed that he was just a paralyzed man, a man who couldn't go anywhere in his life. He thought that his situation defined who he was. He thought to himself, since I can't do this, I must be a failure. Since I can't do this, I must not be smart enough. I must not be strong enough. But look at how Jesus is speaking to him. Jesus is speaking to him as someone he could be, not someone who he thought he was. The way we feel can have a huge effect on who we think we are. You see, the man thought that he shouldn't be able to walk, but Jesus told him, you can walk. We can feel like we're unworthy, but Jesus says, you are worthy. Other people say, you have to be successful, you have to figure things out, but Jesus says, you can never disappoint me. You think you're unforgivable, but Jesus says you are forgiven. You think you are unlovable. Jesus says you are loved. Jesus doesn't talk to us based on how we feel. Instead, Jesus talks to us as who we are. In verse 9 it says, "Instantly the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking." So the man was healed. But the man only found out that he was healed because he listened to Jesus. Because the man could have easily stayed lying, right, on his mat. He thought to himself, he could easily thought to himself, it's not worth failing again. It's not worth being embarrassed again. It's not worth feeling disappointed again. And if he just stayed there without trying to get up, if he didn't believe who Jesus said he was, a man who could not walk, or a man that could walk, he wouldn't have been healed. But that's not what happened. He listened. And the man did what he did, what he felt like was hopeless for him. And it's the same for you and me. When we listen to the way Jesus sees us, we start to become who we're supposed to be. So when I felt like I was stuck and I was behind in Fresno, I had a meeting with this crazy man. His name is Pastor Caesar. I don't know if you've met him before. So we had this meeting in Fresno. This was 3 years later, all right, at the time when I felt like I was stuck. And he essentially told me that there's nothing wrong with applying for hospitals, to applying for jobs, working on your resume and so forth. But he explained that there are seasons in life. And he said, give a chance and listen to Jesus through this season. Listen to what he's trying to tell you and see what happens. See what happens. And as you can see, I'm here. I'm back here in the Bay Area. Now I have here a screenshot of my conversation with Pastor Caesar on Facebook Messenger, and I want you to see this because it shows the dates of when we had this, we were trying to set up this meeting. And as we zoom in, we can see that, you can see the dates here, and it says, you can see that's 1 month later. 1 month later after I had that conversation, that meeting with Pastor Caesar, that I got through that season. That I got a job back here in the Bay Area, and I made it through. See, I also realized later on, that if I had gotten back to the Bay Area without the experience that I had there in Fresno, then the experiences that I had here at my job would have been much more difficult to deal with. But because I had those experiences, or 3 years of experience rather than just one, I were able to handle the difficult situations here at my job much more easily. And I also gained a peace of mind knowing that even though things may not play out the way that I want them to, there are other ways to get through those tough times. So when it seems like you're stuck, and it seems like everyone else is moving forward, when you feel hopeless, know this. It's normal to feel that way. But when you put your hope in Jesus, rather than in your own skills, your own wealth, your own knowledge, your outlook of your difficulties and challenges will begin to change. And this situation that you're in, where you feel stuck, will begin to change. Because Jesus is always moving. Jesus is always moving and weaving, even though you feel stuck. And you'll begin to see yourself the way Jesus sees you. Not as someone who is paralyzed, someone who is stuck, but as someone who can walk, someone who can move forward.
Thank you for joining us for this week's message. Gracepoint Church is located in South San Francisco, California. For additional content or to find out more information about Gracepoint Church, visit us online at wearegracepoint.com.